And today we're going to discuss why you can eat rare steak and not get sick. So you know there's a whole lot of different ways you can have your steak done, be it blue Pittsburgh, rare, medium, and the dreaded well done. Now I say dreaded because generally it does dry your meat out, but there are a lot of folks out there that feel like if you're not having your steak well done, then there's something wrong with it, or you're going to get sick, or that it still has blood in it. It doesn't. It's myoglobin, not blood. But this video is for those people because this will explain to you why it's perfectly safe to actually eat your steaks rare. So my stunt steak today is a Denver steak. You can see it here. This is a lovely cut out of the chuck or shoulder of the beef animal. And it is going to help me demonstrate why you can actually eat it rare. Now, as I've been standing talking to you here, this steak has been multiplying with bacteria. It is covered in it. I can't see it and you can't see it, but a microscope could. Not only is this steak covered in bacteria, but this board is, this counter is, I am, and hate to break it to you, you are too. Bacteria is basically on everything around us. Now, some bacteria don't matter, but others really do because they're the ones that can get us sick, and those are bacteria like E. coli and trichinella and salmonella as they apply to meat. So I have this piece of beef in front of me that you now know is teeming with bacteria. How can I make that edible? By cooking it. So when I take my steak and I go ahead and I sear it in a pan, as long as I get the surface of this steak to reach at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit, then I'm going to have a safe piece of red meat. Because while all of those horrible bacteria that I mentioned, like E. coli, etc., die at 160 degrees, the inside of the steak remains sterile. So I've killed all the nasty stuff from the outside, and the inside, which has kind of never seen the light of day until I'm about to cut it and eat it, doesn't have that bacteria in it. And that right there is why you can afford to eat your steak rare. But there are some exceptions to the rule. So the exception to the rule is blade tenderization, and that's basically where a machine will come along and stick a whole lot of little needles or blades into the meat to tenderize it. So you can see here, I'm kind of just showing you what it would look like. Obviously they're going to be much smaller than this, but I'm pushing the bacteria from the outside of the steak into the middle of the meat. So any steaks that have been blade tenderized do need to be cooked the whole way through to 160 degrees, which is that safe temperature. So it's not just the outside, but the whole thing. And it's identical for ground meat. Just quickly, some examples of blade tenderized steak would be schnitzels or chicken fried steaks, anything that gets pounded down to be thinner. Also, I recently found out that a lot of Costco steaks are blade tenderized, but it actually says it on the packet, so you just want to keep an eye out for that. But ground meat is the same deal. I take this steak and I run it through a grinder. All I'm going to do is mix all of the sterile meat with all of the bacteria-laden meat, and that's why you shouldn't really order your burger pink in the middle. I know that you can, and just like anything, it's a risk, and sometimes you might do it and come out just fine, but there's not really a meat scientist in this country who would take the risk of eating semi-cooked ground beef. So, technically speaking, you should order your ground beef or your burgers well done, and you should make sure that your ground beef is cooked to 160 degrees. Now, why this doesn't apply to poultry is basically, I'm kind of going to get gross here, but it's true. The salmonella that we often find in turkey meat, poultry, chicken is going to be through the whole piece of meat. That's why you want to make sure when you're talking about poultry, you're cooking it to 165 degrees the whole way through in order to make sure that you're killing any of that nasty bacteria off.
Man eats undercooked pork, then doctors show him something moving inside his brain. Eating anything undercooked is not recommended, and while fruits and vegetables are still okay to eat raw, consuming undercooked meat is a big no-no. According to food safety expert Jeff Nelken, since raw meat has tons of bacteria crawling on it, eating undercooked meat is like playing Russian roulette. Then again, there are so many people all over the world who enjoy eating raw and or undercooked meats, including sushi, sashimi, steak tartare, kibe naye, kudos, raw oysters, and much more. Meet 46-year-old construction worker Zhu Zongfa, who resides in Hangzhou in the Zhejiang province of East China. For nearly a month, Zhou Fang was experiencing several episodes of seizures and severe headaches. Then, in November 2019, he started foaming at the mouth and decided to visit the hospital, where Dr. Huyang Jirong from the affiliated hospital of Sheiyang University School of Medicine asked him to get chest and brain MRI scans. After seeing the MRI scan reports, doctors were left horrified and utterly speechless. There were over 700 tapeworms inside Zhou Fa's body, including his brain and lungs. The poor man's chest was infested with pork tapeworm eggs that had burrowed into his tissue, causing cysts. The larvae, which were transported to his brain through the bloodstream, made themselves comfortable there, causing him to experience seed pork tapeworms enter his system. And what exactly are pork tapeworms? You see, just a month before his symptoms began, Xiongfa claimed that he had consumed a hot pot that contained vegetables and undercooked pork. And so, according to doctors, Xiongfa had accidentally ingested eggs of a pork tapeworm, scientifically known as Tania solium or T. solium, from his undercooked pork dinner. As we mentioned earlier, raw meat is riddled with tons of bacteria, and so as soon as Shou Fei ate his nearly raw dinner, the newly hatched eggs were transported from his digestive system to his brain and lungs through the bloodstream. The newly hatched eggs, or the worm larvae, can wreak havoc on human bodies by burrowing into body tissues and forming cysts that can decay and cause infections. Over a long period of time, people who accidentally ingest pork tapeworm eggs can experience severe headaches, blindness, seizures, and dementia. Coming back to Xiongfa, Dr. Huang prescribed 2 medicines, one that killed the larvae and another that helped protect Xiongfa's organs from further damage, as well as reduce side effects brought on by the first medicine. After a successful week of treatment, further tests were performed on Xiongfa to see if he will continue to suffer any long-term effects of the pork tapeworm eggs invasion. According to the World Health Organization, T. solium was declared to be the leading cause of death from food-related diseases in 2015. Experts claim that humans can easily get infected with T. solium if they consume undercooked and infected pork. But why just pork? According to experts, pigs get infected with this parasite after they consume human waste. The parasites then start feeding off their bodies and multiply like mad rabbits. So if a human decides to consume raw or undercooked pork that is infected with T. solium, they indirectly allow the parasite to enter their bodies too. Such was the case of poor Xiongfa. We can only hope that next time he'll ensure that his pork is fully cooked before it is consumed. Do you eat undercooked or raw foods? Tell us what precautions you take before preparing your meals in the comments below.
6 days later and still no effects. Not like those suckers who've been vomiting all week. Oh no, where's the toilet? Salmonella can be tricky. Although it typically appears soon after ingestion, it can sometimes lay dormant for a while and not show its ugly side effects for as long as 6 days. It's been a very long week, but if you have a Campylobacter infection, the good news is that you should start feeling better now. It may still take a few days for it to be entirely out of your system, but you're definitely on the mend. Thankfully, most people don't suffer from long-term health problems caused by food poisoning. However, it can lead to severe complications, particularly with those who are very young, elderly, immune-compromised, or pregnant. Possible long-term effects include irritable bowel syndrome, reactive arthritis, and even neurological issues. But good thing you were able to avoid all that. You just had a couple of days on the toilet. You should be as good as new. So, what makes torisashi, or chicken sashimi, safe? Well, nothing really. Unlike the parasites in raw fish that are killed by freezing, salmonella is unaffected by cold, and chicken is more porous than beef and fish, allowing pathogens to penetrate deep into the meat. Restaurants serving the raw chicken dish will argue that the chickens they use are raised to the highest standard and are served as fresh as possible. In Japan, torisashi producers use a specific breed of chicken called shamo that is fed a particular diet including wasabi leaves, considered a natural antiseptic that kills salmonella. Still, that doesn't mean that the chicken can't come into contact with various bacteria. So, if you do decide to give raw chicken a try, be prepared for the possibility of getting really sick. And remember, if you do get sick, there's not much you can do to lessen its effects. You're just gonna have to ride it through to the end. Now, after watching this, you may no longer be interested in trying raw chicken, but what about eating nothing but McDonald's for an entire year? Would that be safer than torisashi? Well, we'll see what that challenge brings on another episode of Your Body On. These people are eating raw chicken, known as chicken sashimi. It usually consists of thinly sliced chicken breast meat, boiled and seared for about 10 seconds. You've been told all your life never to eat raw chicken, so how are these people able to do it? And what would happen to your body if you had some of this meat? Could you die from eating raw chicken? On today's episode, we're going to find out. This is Your Body On Eating Raw Chicken. Known as torisashi in Japan, this chewy, slimy piece of meat is considered a delicacy by some. And really, who doesn't like chewing on rubbery, gel shoe insoles? After all, it would be great exercise for the jaw muscles. So what would happen if you ate some? Well, let's say you're the adventurous type and have decided to try torisashi. Or maybe you just accidentally ate some chicken that wasn't thoroughly cooked. What effect is it going to have on your body? Well, that depends on what pathogens, if any, are in your chicken. Immediately after eating, any sickness you may feel would likely be a figment of your imagination. The idea of having eaten raw chicken would cause your stomach to turn over. Of course, if you actually chose to eat raw chicken, you may just be feeling sated and satisfied. And proud that you weren't going to let some pesky little pathogens rule your life. However, by hour 6, you may start feeling the first symptoms of salmonellosis. Cramps in your stomach, nausea, vomiting, and headaches. Your temperature starts to rise and you'd suffer from a fever. And you'd best stay close to the toilet as diarrhea will have you heading there in no time. It might even be bloody.
It feels like I'm dying.
By hour 8, you'll still be sitting on the toilet. You might even have severe abdominal cramps. That's because salmonella isn't the only pathogen you have to worry about. In this case, you're suffering from Clostridium perfringens. Although this pathogen usually appears in cooked meat that is kept warm for a long time, it can also be found in raw chicken. The good thing about this pathogen is that, unpleasant as it is, it usually only lasts for about 24 hours. Still, it's 24 hours I wouldn't want to experience. So, one day later, you should start feeling better. 2 days have passed since you ate the raw chicken. You haven't felt any adverse effects. You've got nothing to worry about now, right? After all, if you were going to get sick, it would have happened by now. Well, not if the chicken was infected with campylobacteriosis. If you have a campylobacter infection, you won't start feeling the fever, cramps, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea until 2 to 5 days after eating raw chicken. The diarrhea could be so bad and bloody that you might even suffer from dehydration as well. Okay, 4 days have passed now since you munched down on that chicken sashimi. If you were suffering from salmonella, you should start feeling better. Your temperature should be back to normal by now, and the cramps, headaches, and vomiting should be just about done. Oh, finally.
May harbor, fish tends not to be ground or mixed. That lowers the likelihood of a single disease-carrying salmon or tuna contaminating others. Also, any raw fish you consume at a sushi restaurant are caught in colder waters and frozen before you eat them. This kills the encysted worms and other parasites. Unfortunately, freezing doesn't kill parasitic E. coli and many of the harmful microorganisms you'd find in meat. As for the conclusion, with raw fish, oysters, and other uncooked seafood, you're taking a risk, though not nearly as big a risk as eating that bloody tenderloin or tartare.
Woman eating them ended in tragedy.
In a million years, I never thought that an oyster could kill you.
Vicki Bergquist was thrilled to get a sack of fresh oysters from a friend. As she shucked them, her wife Jeanette dug in.
She especially liked oysters and had them frequently.
24 hours later, Jeanette was seriously ill.
You could see that she was really struggling to breathe, and her legs had broken out into a really bad rash.
Vicki, a hospice nurse, rushed her to Our Lady of the Lake Hospital in Baton Rouge.
She was scared when we got to the hospital.
Doctors say raw oysters can cause intestinal problems for some people because they carry a bacteria known as Vibrio. More than 35 million pounds of oysters are harvested and consumed each year in the U.S. But for some people, eating oysters could pose serious health risks. The CDC advises that people battling cancer, diabetes, or liver disease should avoid eating raw oysters. Also at risk, people who have undergone gastric bypass surgery like Jeanette, a danger Vicki says they were unaware of.
Her temperature was going up, her legs were really inflamed and hot.
Doctors told Jeanette she had contracted a deadly form of flesh-eating bacteria called Vibrio vulnificus.
I was very terrified because they said that they didn't expect her to last initially more than 24 to 48 hours. And they had done everything that they could to save her life.
36 hours later, the bacteria was ravaging Jeanette's entire body.
This did look like a nightmare. Her legs were being eaten up and her kidneys were being eaten up. She did fight all the way to the bitter end for her life.
Sadly, 20 days after eating raw oysters, Jeanette died. She was 55.
The last thing we said was that, I love you.
According to the CDC, vibriosis, which is not limited to just oysters, can result in amputation. It sickens 80,000 people a year, and about 100 die from it. Now Vicki wants to get this message out.
An oyster can kill you.